very pleased and honored to have you join our discussion on a very important topic today, which is harnessing tax benefits to stimulate business and economic growth. My name is Nana Abu, a senior manager in the Tax, Regulatory and People Services Division in KPMG in West Africa. I will be moderating the discussion today with our distinguished guests, and this session promises a deep delve into pioneer status incentive, as already mentioned in the topic. We'll be discussing what it's all about and how companies can benefit from the scheme. I'm delighted to introduce to you today our distinguished guests and panelists. With 17 years of experience at the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, Mrs. Uchenna Okonkwo is currently an acting deputy director and the head of policy and compliance in the Incentives Administration Division of the NIPC. She holds a bachelor's degree in economics and a master's in business administration with specialization in finance and investments. Her role includes promoting and facilitating material investments into critical sectors and the administration of pioneer status incentive to eligible companies to enhance their survival, profitability, and sustainability, all geared towards national economic growth and development. Please join me as I welcome Mrs. Uchenna Okonkwo. You're very welcome, ma'am. We also have with us today a partner with the Tax, Regulatory and People Services Division, KPMG in West Africa, and head of our tax incentive desk, Elizabeth Olaghere. Elizabeth has in-depth experience providing tax and business advisory services to leading Nigerian and multinational companies. She also has extensive experience in processing a myriad of fiscal incentives for clients such as pioneer status incentives, export expansion grants, and many other such incentives of the government. She has also been actively involved in policy formulations as she participated in the review of the pioneer status list of industries and products, and was also a member of the implementation committee of the Nigerian Startup Act. You are very welcome, Lizzie. Thank you. Thank you very much. Before we go into the session fully, I would like to announce a few housekeeping rules. Upon entry, all mics are muted. During the panel discussions, please drop your questions on the chat box and we'll ensure that we address all questions within the allotted time for this session, which is supposed to be a 2-hour session, packed full for you. To all our participants, we welcome you again to this deeply enriching session. We would quickly, for a start, we will take a poll to get a feel, of your knowledge of this interesting topic of today. What is being projected on screen is the barcode. Please scan the barcode and it will take you to the poll questions. Also, we will be dropping in the chat box the link for those that are unable to use the barcode. Please click the link and it will take you to the poll session. Please, we would enjoin everyone, to participate in the poll session. Thank you very much. Please scan the barcode. Yes, thank you very much. The link has been put on the chat box. Please click on the link and it will take you straight to the poll session. Okay. We welcome more participants to please join the session so that we can get started. Okay. So the first question is, what is the primary benefit of Pioneer Status Incentive for businesses, right? The primary benefits, right? I see on the screen over 80% say it's tax exemption. About 17% say it's in respect of investment subsidies, that's the primary benefits. I see the polls, more responses. Thank you for participating. So we have about we have about 79%, saying it's tax exemption. That is the primary benefits, and about 21 saying so it's between tax exemption and investment subsidies as the primary benefits. Thank you. I would move to the next question. The next question is, do you agree that Pioneer Status Incentive can significantly stimulate business and economic growth in Nigeria? Interesting, interesting. Oh, okay. So about 94% think so. About 10 say it has little impact on economic growth. Interesting. Madam Uchenna, I believe you're seeing our slides with the interesting answers.
Yes, I can say that.
Okay, so I thought we we're going to have about 100%, saying it's going to stimulate economic growth, but we have about 17 here saying it has little or no impact. So it will be interesting, when we go into the conversations fully.
Yeah.
Sure.
Nana, I think it's very interesting to see this. We have obviously 83% saying they think so, and 17% saying it has little or no impact on economic growth. Of course, pioneer status has been a subject of great debate in the current economic climate. So, I mean, there will be some people that think the pioneer status incentive, it needs to be more reformed or refined to be targeted. So this looks like it could be balanced. When we engage further in the course of this chat, we'll see if the people that have said it has little or no impact on the economy will change their mind. Let's see.
Absolutely. I look forward to that as well. Thank you very much, Liz. Thank you.
Myself, yeah. Sure.
Okay, please, let's, the next question we have is, how effective is the Pioneer Status Incentive in driving economic growth and development? Is it very effective? Is it not very effective? Is it somewhat effective or not effective at all? Interesting again. This is a follow-on from the previous response.
Indeed.
Okay, so we have about 44 saying it's somewhat effective, not very effective, and very effective, I think, seem to have the order of the day with, with over 50% thinking it's somewhat effective and not, somewhat effective and very effective, about 63%. So I think this is also a follow-on from the previous comments, Elise, as you mentioned, with, people having diverse and different views. So we'll quickly move to the next question. Okay, so it says, how important is the Pioneer Status Incentive in attracting foreign investment in the country? Is it very important? Is it not very important? Is it somewhat important or not important at all? Okay, interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
But Mrs. Uchenna, I think this, because the NIPC has actually conducted quite a couple of surveys with investors, because part of the NIPC's role is to promote direct investment, both locally and international investment. So from your engagements with investors, how highly do they rate the tax holiday scheme? On this poll, we're seeing 58%, 26% saying somewhat important. But based on your interviews that you conduct, how highly do they rate the scheme?
Well, thank you very much, Lizzie. Very highly. And, it's a bit of a concern to us at the NIPC. You'll find out that most of the beneficiaries of the Pioneer Status Incentive are foreign-owned companies. I think our Nigerian entrepreneurs, it could be that there are no much sensitizations to them. But then you find out that most foreign companies, before they even venture into doing business in Nigeria, they come to ask, what are the incentives on the table? Most of the times you find out that by the time they get to know about the Pioneer Status Incentive, they are like eager to come and invest in Nigeria. So it really drives FDI to the country. Regardless, we have high rate of returns on investments, but then it's still a thing to behold for most companies that are investing in Nigeria because of the tough terrain. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. I mean, it obviously is within the context of other parameters that investors look at. They look at your enabling business environment, they look at access to infrastructure. So within that context also, it would continue to be an important element in decision making within the context of the parameters. Okay, so we have 54%, very important. Somewhat, I suspect the somewhat important is because if you have incentives, but there are other, challenges, there are other bottlenecks, security, infrastructure, power, all that also has to work, harmoniously with incentives just to achieve that optimum balance.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Lizzie and Mrs. Uche. We'll move quickly to the last question in the poll. Yeah. So the question goes, do you agree that Pioneer Status Incentive has encouraged foreign direct investment in Nigeria? So this is also a follow-on from the previous question, and we pretty much should see similar responses. Yes, I think so, taking the order of the day. Okay, needle has, changed. Other factors that influence investment decisions, security, political instability, foreign exchange, skilled labor, have more impact on foreign direct investment. So this is just, a follow-on from Lizzie's comments previously, where people have that feel that it's somewhat because of some of these other, myriad of issues that investors have to deal with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially in the current climate, the current economic climate.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for participating in this poll session. It's interesting that we've gotten a feel, of what your thoughts are and your understanding, of this session. And it appears, right, a number of the audience are, quite vast in terms of the topic for today. So I'll quickly just, ask Mrs. Uche just to provide, a bit of context. Yes, the audience appear to have a fair understanding, of what the Pioneer Status Incentive is all about, but just, from your perspective, please just, expatiate, let us know what this Pioneer Status Incentive is really all about.
All right, thank you. The Pioneer Status Incentives is actually a tax holiday which grants qualifying industries and products relief from the payment of corporate income tax for an initial period of 3 years and extendable for either 1 year, 1 year more, or 2 years straight. So all in all, it's a 5 years tax holiday. And when we talk of a tax holiday, it's just corporate income tax holiday. And possibly for companies that are into withholding tax, it also exempts them from the payment of the company does the withholding tax. But then, some businesses don't have to do with withholding taxes anyway. But for those ones that will have to venture into what will lead to them paying withholding tax, it also exempts them. And, the name is a bit misleading because you'll find out that, in context, most companies, when they come to us, they will like tell us that, look, they are the pioneer of this actually activity or product. And we'll tell them no, that, you know, the PSI is actually founded under, there's an enabling law, which is the Industrial Development Income Tax holiday. And there's a designation that is conferred by the inclusion of the product or activity on a list approved by the Federal Executive Council. So based on that, your activity must be listed for you to be able to be granted the PSI.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Uche. Elizabeth, any comments? You know, the perspective she brought about some companies, because they feel they're the leaders, the pioneers, you know, they come to them. Any thoughts on that or comments?
Yes, so Madam Uche has covered it. Essentially, the pioneer status is based on situations where the president is satisfied that a particular industry needs to be done on a more robust basis, or it's not up to the scale of the economic requirements of the country, or it's in the it's expedient for the country to enhance this economy because of the benefit it will have on the country, then the president can designate an industry or a product as pioneer. So for that purpose, you see that a lot of industries are not necessarily just pioneer like the literal sense of the word. It's more towards an alignment with economic policy. We had the economic recovery growth plan that also transited. So you see a lot of alignment with these industries. And interestingly, the new list was released in 2017. So you see addition of new thriving economies and industries that the government is trying to boost in the grand scheme of the economy.
Thank you very much. You know, just staying on that thought.
Okay, Nana, are you there?
Apologies, I'm here. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so for just staying on that thought, thanks a lot, Lizzie. So for companies that you know, want to seek this pioneer status incentive, right?
Nana, you're on mute, or I didn't hear you.
Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes.
Okay, apologies, I think there's a glitch. So I was asking that for companies that want to seek this pioneer status incentive, what exactly, you know, are the requirements?
Okay, so obviously, first and foremost, you must be registered in Nigeria, or else Madam Uche is going to pass your file back to your country of origin. So you have to have a entity that is registered in
You're right.
and then you must apply within a year. So it's very, and this is some of the pitfalls that kind of create that bottleneck for some companies. You need to apply within a year of commercial production. It's very important that you fulfill that time frame. You also have to comply with the legal requirements. So all your certificate of registrations at the CAC, your certificate of incorporation, and other employee-related taxes and levies, you must be able to show and demonstrate your certificate of compliance. And that's why the Pioneer Status Scheme, even though it grants you a tax holiday from companies' income tax, it does try to complement the government's initiative to get taxes from other types of taxes. For instance, you must demonstrate that you are complying with other employee-related taxes for you to qualify for Pioneer Status Incentive. Other requirements is that you need to be in an activity that has been designated as pioneer status. So either the pioneer status industry or the pioneer status product. You also need to have non-current assets of 100 million. Before, it just used to be share capital of about 10 million. And then when the 2017 review of the incentive was implemented, it then demonstrates, a company must demonstrate that they have assets of 100 million. So those are some of the general requirements, at least preliminary requirements. A company must obviously demonstrate the benefits, the tangible benefits of the incentive to the NIPC through their presentation, where they would put together information on employment generation, skills and technology transfer, export, and other parameters that then bring that case together to demonstrate the value to the economy.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Okay, go ahead, Mark, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, I said that's easy. Yeah, she's on point. Yeah.
Okay, so it's interesting, right? That's there really has to be like a business case, if I may summarize, Liz's comments. I know at the point when Mrs. Uche was speaking, you made reference to certain industries, certain products. Just would like to find out how the PSI scheme aligns with the federal government's economic development goals, and what industries or sectors, are being targeted.
Okay. The PSI enabling law, which is the Industrial Development Income Tax Relief Act of number 22 of 1971, aligns with the federal government's economic development goals, as it states that an industry or product is designated as pioneer if it's not carried on in Nigeria on a scale suitable to economic requirements, just as Lizzie stated initially, and that there are favorable prospects for further development in Nigeria. It is expedient in the public interest too. So having stated that, it is important to note that the federal government of Nigeria is committed to encouraging and attracting investment into critical sectors of the economy, which will significantly impact development and deliver key benefits to the country, including economic growth, diversification, industrial and sectoral development, employment, skill acquisition. All those things are the alignment which Lizzie mentioned initially. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lizzie, any additional thoughts on these key priority sectors and areas?
Yeah, so the key priority sectors, you see a lot has happened between the PSI scheme, for instance, was suspended in 2015, September, and it took about 2 years to revamp the administration of the scheme and even the new products and industries. So in 2017, when the new list was released and gazetted, we saw the e-commerce sector playing a huge significant role in the list. We saw the introduction of entertainment and film. We saw the introduction of the creative industry. So you can see that this also aligns with the government's initiative to diversify the economy. There's a lot of focus now also on indirect tax, VAT. You can see from a global trend and even from the African trend, there's a lot of direction towards value-added tax. And one thing that the PSI, the Pioneer Status Tax Holiday, does, which we had seen in the past, is to give companies the opportunity to stabilize their business and even expand. And when you see that expansion where a pioneer company plows back that money, you then see the propensity for the company to supply more. And then because of that, you see an uptake of consumption tax like VAT. And with VAT increasing, you can then see that the Nigerian government, their ability to pivot our tax collection from indirect tax is really increasing. And that trend actually aligns with what you have with other African countries and even on a global scale. So there's some synergy with the Pioneer Status Incentive in some part, complementing the federal government's efforts to diversify the economy, to also increase our collection from VAT, where a pioneer company is given the opportunity to really expand and scale We saw that happen with the telecommunication industry. We saw that happen with the cement industry, where there was really an exponential increase in revenue after the tax holiday, and this resulted in increased VAT collection and even income tax after the tax holiday period.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. The parts on, diversifying the economy, and then it shifts more to indirect tax, which is a key focal area in terms of tax policy formulations of the current administration. So it's interesting, right, to see that from this, incentive and advantage, there's more, that could be gained. I know you have, spoken a bit, about a number of the benefits even from this conversation, but please, if you could just, elaborate more on some additional benefits, that companies stand to gain besides, the tax exemption and diversification.
Yeah, Mrs. Uche has spoken about some of them. Key benefits, one of the principal benefits is the exemption from companies' income tax and tertiary education tax. Obviously, the dividend that you distribute from your pioneer profits will be exempt from withholding tax. Also, your capital allowances will be frozen until after you come out of your tax holiday, so you would have that. Also, the net losses that you incur during that pioneer period would also be taken forward to your post-pioneer period. Also, it could help with cash flow, particularly in this economic climate where a lot of companies are really dealing with supply chain issues, cash crunch matters, because if you are exposed to withholding tax deduction, your income would be exempt from withholding tax deduction during that period. I mean, that being said, of course, there is an interaction between the tax incentive scheme and the trend towards BEPS, where you have the Pillar 2 on global minimum tax. So there is a lot of talk right now. I mean, tax incentives globally are receiving a lot of attention in how to align those tax incentives to ensure that a country doesn't lose its taxing rights. So despite those benefits, there's a lot of reform that is still ongoing with respect to optimizing the tax incentives for all that are concerned. The country at large, the companies who are really grappling with a lot of economic indices that are not really favorable at the moment. So it's a lot to deal with, but there is that balance that can be struck with achieving the benefits from the tax holiday.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. Mrs. Uche, any additional thoughts, in terms of reforms, from a regulatory standpoint?
Sorry, I didn't get you.
I was saying that, the insights Lizzie has brought,
yes,
in terms of trying to create a balance such that, incentives are not provided and then there's some sort of loss, to the government. And if there are any reforms, or projected reforms from a regulatory standpoint in respect of the incentives, are there any, reforms in the works in terms of the incentives to businesses? More so in this climate, as we are aware, the climate that we are in, right, calls for a number of companies, seeking more support in terms of incentives. Are there any reforms in the works such that a balance is created towards what the government, seeks to drive in this PSI?
Okay, yeah, since after the 2017 reform, we actually started the second phase of the reform, but with what we have currently, given the new administration, there's a presidential committee on fiscal policy and tax reform that is working assiduously to ensure a better fiscal policy and tax regime, which obviously will align the PSI to be more focus driven. So, there are no informations to that, but I can tell you they are working assiduously in implementing that. That's the new reform.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you. Okay. Elizabeth, I just want you to provide a bit more insights on the compliance requirements. You touched on this earlier, right? But in terms of specific compliance requirement, once one has obtained the pioneer status incentive, it's not a case where you obtain the certificate and you go to sleep, right? So what are the requirements for companies that have gotten the PSIs?
Yes, Nana, thank you. That's a very good question, especially in the light of the comments, the poll that we took at the beginning. Some of our participants are of the view that is the pioneer status really effective? And that's why following the 2017 reforms, there was the introduction of companies to file an annual performance report no later than 30th of June of the following year. And the essence of this is for the NIPC to be able to gather and collate information on the performance of pioneer status companies. Some of this information that is collected, like raw material, utilization of raw material to enhance backward integration, employment generation, skill technology transfer. So all this information is collected for the NIPC to be able to measure the impact of the tax holiday that is granted to the companies. The other thing that a pioneer company must realize is that even though you have a tax holiday, you are not exempted from filing your income tax returns. So therefore, you will continue to file these returns. You're also expected to comply with transfer pricing regulations by filing your transfer pricing returns as well. The IDA, the Industrial Development Income Tax Relief Act, also requires that your pioneer profits are ring-fenced separately so that in the event of a dividend distribution out of that profit, you are able to demonstrate and show the trail of that profit to be able to enjoy your withholding tax exemption on that profit. You're also supposed to do something called a certificate of qualifying capital expenditure. And this essentially is supposed to be done pre-pioneer and during your, at the end of your third year. The essence is to certify your assets before you get the pioneer status and in your first 3 years. Another key thing is in the event that you have losses during your pioneer status, you're expected to certify those losses with the FIRS, just also for the purpose of carrying those losses forward into your post-pioneer period. So those are some of the key compliance requirements during the tax holiday period.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. There's a lot, to comply with.
Yeah.
Indeed. You're getting a tax break, so it's a give and take. So on the one hand, the government, the NIPC also needs to be able to assess the benefits of this for the purpose of tracking. As Mrs. Uchenna said, the incentive schemes generally are going to undergo a lot of reforms, and this kind of information and data is what will be able to demonstrate the viability of this incentive in this climate, both from the government perspective where there's a budget deficit and from the company's perspective where some companies are actually looking at tax incentives for a lifeline.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Izzy, for these deep insights. You mentioned, during the course of the conversation, amidst, a lot of the compliance requirements, you mentioned an annual performance report, right? I would like Mrs. Uche, if you can just, provide more context to this.
Okay, yes. It's one of the compliance requirements. The beneficiaries are meant to actually submit that. And, the performance report provides information on the company's progress. You'll find out that by the time we grant the PSI to the companies, for the initial 3 years, if they will have to come for extension, right? So before we can grant them that extension, there's something we look at, or almost like a comparative analysis, as in where were you when we issued the initial 3 years? So we need to find out that you're actually making progress. That's during the first 3 years. So based on those progress, we're meant to track those progress, because aside from giving these incentives, we also build data on those companies that we give these incentives to. Because if you're foregoing revenue, government revenue, for some material investments that an investor has come on board with to the nation, you'll find that we need to know the material investment, we capture those investments, and we have to know also the skill transfer. We monitor all those things, and there's what we call the monitoring and evaluation before we can give you the extension. So when we go there, the annual performance report is what we actually gather the information, and when we go there, we'll now ascertain whether the report that they have given to us over the course of the 3 initial years are actually indeed what we're seeing on ground. And if that is satisfactory, then we can go ahead for the extension.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting, right? This check. So after the PSI is granted, there's that check, to see that indeed, right, the whole intent, of the PSI is being achieved, such as you mentioned earlier, it's geared towards growth and development, companies being able to scale up, their operations. Yeah. So having to do that check after 3 years and check how viable, this has been to the business is really very essential, if you ask me. And it's good, and it shows also, the level of work that the regulators have to put into, this whole process, doing all the checks. And then, in terms of the extension, right, please, I know you had touched on this, but you can just, provide the B2R, more information as, regard the extension. How long is it for? When does the company come to, seek extension? You had talked about the fact that there has to be an assessment for the extension. How long is this extension? And, how often, from your own experience, do companies come to seek for an extension after being granted 3 years?
Most often, they actually come for the extension. And, the extension can actually be for 1 year, then extendable for another 1 year or 2 years straight. From the course of work, we have only been able to grant 2 years straight. And reason being that you find out that we're trying to, as much as possible, reduce the cost of doing business, because it takes there's a whole rigorous exercise for an extension. So if we'll have to extend for 1 year, then the company will have to start the whole process again for another 1 year. So most of the times, once they are able to check all those, the monitoring, that's the performance reporting and the monitoring and evaluation, all those compliances that Lizzie have mentioned initially, you'll find that we most often than grant them the PSI. But then most importantly is that they need to apply within 1 month of expiration. And, the most important document they actually need for that extension is what we call the Certificate of Qualifying Capital Expenditure. If you're not able to get that within the stipulated time frame as indicated in the EDITRA, that can actually bar you from getting the extension. Very important, the Certificate of Qualifying Capital Expenditure. So by the time that is done, you have applied within the stipulated time frame. Then we'll now look at your progress, even though the performance reports that you have sent and the monitoring, we've seen. So based on that, we're able to take an informed decision, then put up a report to our management after the technical committee would have done their thorough work on what the assessment for the extension is before the extension can be granted. But then aside from that, there are regulatory fees that they are meant to also pay. So for the extension, right? For the new applicants, what they normally do is that they apply, they do a formal letter, then the processing fee is 100,000 for the new, but for extension, it's 100,000. Then aside from that, when you're under the extension, that means you've been granted the first 3 years. You're meant to be paying the annual service charge, which is just 1% of your pioneer profit. So if you're able to like keep to all those compliances, then your extension would be processed further.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Uche. Thank you. Interesting, very, very interesting and insightful. I'm really learning a lot as well. In the course of the conversation, we had talked into a fresh application, talked into the extension, and then fees and requirements, compliance requirements for companies. For a company that is, looking to seek pioneer status incentive, what typically, after putting, all the documentation together, getting ready, all the necessary fees, what typically is the time frame for processing the PSI?
Okay, based on our guideline, right? The part 1 of the processing actually takes 18 weeks, and the part 2 takes 7 weeks, all in all 25 weeks. But then I need to like delve into some issues that were actually considered when we were coming up with the process guideline. You find out that some companies are not actually aware of the requisite documentation in terms of regulatory documentation that they are meant to submit. By the time they do their application, right, and we're able to like sensitize them on the requirements, which are actually on the website, and most of the documents, the gazetted process guideline and everything that was distributed. But you find out that some companies still apply and not get those requisite documentation. And after their presentation, it takes like forever for them to get back. So it was based on that actually we now considered the delays from that's both internally and externally. We came up with the 25 weeks, but then some companies have actually come to NIPC to process PSI and were able to get it within 2 months. That is 8 weeks. So long as you have all your requisite documentation, it is nothing that can take up to 25 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see Lizzie smiling. So Lizzie, please share your thoughts as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Uchenna. I think one thing for sure is that following the reforms that happened in 2017, and we've seen a bit more transparency with the process. And to a large extent, there is some level of predictability with timelines in some regards, right? As Mrs. Uchenna said, there are some elements that are within the control of the company. There are some elements that are within the control of the NIPC. And the elements within the control of the company, we've seen real progress with the time frame that it takes to execute those elements. For instance, making that presentation to the NIPC. From my past experience in the last year, we've seen a lot of traction with making presentations. The presentations used to be physical in Abuja, but with the advent of COVID, we've seen the NIPC use digital means to enable us make those presentations, and that has really also reduced the time frame. So I think, like what Mrs. Uchenna is saying, to the extent that a company has its records and the company is in a mindset to really accelerate their tax incentive processing, it could be processes within the control of the company can be accelerated based on what the guideline actually says. So there is more transparency, and it's very possible what Mrs. Uchenna said, but things need to be in place in terms of documentation and the legal requirements that I talked about at the beginning.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. Thank you, Mrs. Uche. It's interesting to note that when all these things are in place, within 2 to 3 months, companies can be availed as far as the requisite information and documents are in place. And also, the parts you spoke on, Lizzie, on, the regulators, that's NIPC in this instance, leveraging technology and using virtual, modes to have those meetings. So for instance, companies that are located in different regions, right? Instead of having to, travel down to make those presentations, costs, being incurred, right? The NIPC is, quite apt in terms of having those sessions virtually to achieve the same purpose. So it's really interesting, and it's really good to know. I would just, quickly ask the expansion project, during the course of the conversation, we're made to understand, or there's the understanding that the PSI could, be extended. So you've had it for 3 years. You could either get an extension for 1 year or 2 years, depending on the preference, right? I know in the course of the conversation also, Lizzie and Mrs. Uche, you had touched on some of the industries and the products, that is under, the scheme, right? It would be good for you to just, elaborate more, on some of these industries. And then if you can also, share your perspective on if an expansion, right? If one can expand an existing project. So you've gotten PSI under an eligible industry or product for a particular period. And if you then expand, production activity, in that same line, if one can still, go to the NIPC to seek PSI.
No. The PSI is actually product-based or activity-based, right? So as an entity, when you apply for a certain product or an activity, once you're given for that product or activity and you've exhausted the initial 3 years and the extension of 2 years, you cannot, based on maybe expansion project on that same activity or product, get another PSI because the enabling law does not that's permitted. But then a company can actually expand to another product or activity aside from the one that it's been granted for, and it can be granted. The company will be eligible for another PSI, but certainly not the one that it has already exhausted the PSI on.
Thank you very much, Madam. Lizzie, your comments or thoughts regarding the specific industries, and products. We've heard from Madam. It is clear that you can't, seek an expansion for an activity that you've, been granted PSI. But if you could throw, a bit more context to some of these products and industries, just putting it more into perspective.
Okay, so the pioneer status list is broken down into separate industries. So you have, for instance, agriculture, so agro-processing, you have manufacturing. So you have all sorts of manufacturing ranging from apparel to food produce. You also have services. So there's the introduction of the ICT, Information Communication and Technology. There was also the introduction of trade in 2017, and trade covers essentially e-commerce, where 70% or more of your activities are conducted online. You also have power generation, distribution, and transmission. You also have on that list alternative renewables, so solar, nuclear. You'll have on the list telecommunications. Telecommunications continues to be very important, and you have various elements of that on the list. So the list is replete with industries that the government is trying to incentivize because of the significant benefit that these economies or sectors would have on the economy. We look at the amount of revenue that we generate from oil and gas, and you can see that if the government puts a bit more focus on non-oil revenue, there could be a significant leapfrog in the government revenue. So these industries are there to incentivize companies, both domestic and foreign, to continue to invest in them, pending when the NIPC does a review of the list and deletes an industry that is termed as mature. like what we saw with the cement industry.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lizzie. So there's a broad, list of industries and products that is, under the scheme, and companies, just need to be aware of this product and industry. And if you carrying out any of these activities, then please, it'll be good to take advantage, of the incentive once you qualify and are eligible. Right. So thank you so very much, Lizzie and Mrs. Uche. I recall, in the beginning of the conversation, Lizzie, you mentioned, something about losses. And I know that Madam had touched on, some requirements, based on performance, company's performance. Why is expected that, as you get these tax exemptions, right, you plow it back into the business. There are instances still, where losses, will still result, right? Just to share a bit, more perspective on what really happens to the losses incurred during the pioneer period.
Yeah, Nana, so you're right. There are situations, especially in this climate, we've seen situations where companies, even in their pioneer period, could incur losses. So what the tax law says is that your net losses during the pioneer period can be carried forward to your post-pioneer period to be relieved against your total profits. Essentially, what your net loss is a combination of your losses and your profits. So in the event that you do have a profit during that pioneer period, you need to net off that profit with the loss. And then it's the net effect that you carry forward to your post-pioneer period to be utilized. So it's essentially saying that you would not be worse off in the event that you have pioneer status and you still incurred a loss. You do have the opportunity to carry that forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I see Mrs. Uche, any additional comments?
Yes, I just wanted to add to it that most companies too that apply the NIPC, you'll find out that by the time they send in their annual returns, notice that they are making losses, but that does not deter us from processing their extension, because we know that, the initial years, the formative years of businesses are usually tough, and the PSI is there to enable them actually plow back the profits. And then unfortunately for the ones making losses, that's as against making the profit at that point of the PSI. But then the good news is that they can actually carry it over to immediately after the PSI period to net it out.
Thank you so much. A very important point you touched on, right? Where you mentioned that even though they may be making losses, it doesn't deter, the NIPC from granting extension, to companies that come to seek for extension. So it's really, very, very worthy of notes that consideration, is still being made and is made by the NIPC. Thank you so much for the additional insights. Staying on losses, I would just want to also talk about assets as well. During the PSI also, companies would incur significant assets. Actually, Lizzie had mentioned, for companies in the manufacturing, sector, for instance, there would be significant capital expenditure, right? If you could throw more lights, and Lizzie as well, share your perspective, please, on what really happens to the assets that I'm purchasing and accumulating, it's significant costs to the company as well during the pioneer period.
Okay, so during that pioneer period, like the name mentions, Mrs. Uche had come with some good news, some good tidings. I would join in that trajectory. Your assets as well would essentially be in a state, or it would be frozen, and then you'll be deemed to have purchased this asset on the first day following the end of the tax incentive. So therefore, your assets will be protected and ring-fenced and deemed to be acquired on the day that you come out of the pioneer status incentive. But then again, there are some requirements. So like Mrs. Uche mentioned, there is the very important certificate of qualifying capital expenditure. And that certificate is processed by the Federal Inland Revenue Service. The certificate shows that a company has incurred this amount. So it documents the quantum of the asset and it validates the company's ability to claim capital allowances on this asset post the pioneer period. It also shows any tax written down value that you had pre-pioneer period. So it's very important that companies are positioned to process their certificate of qualifying capital expenditure. And some of the precursor for processing this certificate is the certificate of fixed asset acceptance, because it forms a critical base for which the FRS will rely on to be able to process the certificate of qualifying capital expenditure. So essentially, your assets are ring-fenced until you come out of the tax holiday period, and then you can begin to claim your capital allowances.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. So there's really, so much, benefits. The fact that your losses, can be, taken in post-pioneer. The fact that the capital allowances are also frozen until, you come out of pioneer, then you can then take that as a claim against the profit you would make post-pioneer is really quite, I would say it is a great one, for companies that are willing to, or, open to taking advantage, of this incentive from the government. Thanks so much, Lizzie. I think the question I wanted to ask was to provide a bit more context on the certificate of qualifying capital expenditure, which you have, done justice to. That was going to be a follow-on question. But at this point, I would just crave our indulgence, please. We'll be going on a 3-minute break, right? Stretch break. We've been sitting for almost an hour, right? So please, I'll just crave our indulgence for a stretch break for 3 minutes, and we'll be back here. Please put your questions as communicated previously on the chat box so that we can, address them once we're done with the panel discussions. Thank you so much, everyone, and I'll see you in 3 minutes. Thank you.
This isn't the world you grew up in. You've become an expert in areas of the business that go well beyond tax. Your organization is more global, increasingly digital. Your business models are more complex. Compliance is getting complicated, and penalties are more severe. Governments around the world have moved towards taxes that are easier to collect and administer through technology. Suddenly, your board wants to hear from you about risks and opportunities, and you're not the tax leader you were when you started out. You know how to transform your tax data into meaningful insights. And if you're anything like the other ambitious, future-thinking tax leaders out there, you've managed to do all of this with fewer resources and less budget. Maybe these tools still feel disconnected from one another. Not anymore. Introducing KPMG Digital Gateway, the single platform solution that gives you access to the full suite of KPMG tax and legal technologies you use. Across our global network, we are investing $5 billion over 5 years in technology, people, and innovation to accelerate the digital transformation of KPMG firms and our clients, and more than $1 billion in tax and legal technology specifically in that period. KPMG Digital Gateway puts the fruit of our investments at your fingertips, bringing together the expertise of alliances, technology solutions, and the KPMG global network of professionals into one integrated platform. Putting our investments in machine learning, deep analytics, visualizations, and AI technologies in one place, all driven by the rich data you already have on hand, powered by Microsoft Azure, built on the cloud. KPMG Digital Gateway and the teams behind the solutions are working together to help change the lives of tax leaders and their teams, redefining target operating models and transforming tax functions for the new world order. You've done so much already. Just imagine what the future of tax will be with a platform like this behind you.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. I trust that we've grabbed a cup of coffee, tea, or water. So you're welcome back to our discussion. Okay, so we'll just take another poll, right? I'm sure we've all, heard a lot over the last 1 hour. We've gotten a lot of, insights from Mrs. Uche and from Lizzie as well. We'll take another poll now, right? Just to get a bit more of what you've gathered or understood from the session and your own perspective, even from maybe the experiences that, you may have had. What is being projected on the screen is the barcode. Please, just like we did previously, please scan the barcode on the chat box as well. We would also drop the link that would take you to the second poll session. Please, I encourage everyone to join and participate at the poll sessions. While we're also, we'll be taking the poll, please, if you have any questions, any insights, comments that you'd like to share, please drop these comments or questions on the chat box and we will address them. We have our seasoned and erudite speakers on this session. So please feel free to drop your questions. Please, let's join the poll session. Thank you. Okay. Welcome everyone to join and participate. Okay, so we'll have the first question. Our first question is, are you aware of all the eligible industries and products for Pioneer Status Incentive? Right. Wow, interesting. We have about 50% saying they're somewhat aware. About 23% are not aware. And then, okay, this is moving up a bit. Mrs. Uche, I am sure you can see the screen. Yes.
Yeah, I'm seeing
we have
it.
a number of people that are not aware, of this incentive that has been on for years.
That's really a sad one. But sometime I think 3 weeks ago, when the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria had an event, it actually dawned on myself and some of my colleagues that were there that some entrepreneurs in Nigeria are not aware of this incentive. It was after that event that we started thinking of the need to actually start some form of sensitization exercise to enable upcoming entrepreneurs or even existing ones to know about the incentive.
Yes, thanks for that, Mrs. Uche. I think for me, one area that I thought would be an opportunity is the NIPC's one-stop shop. Companies that have foreign participation are supposed to register with the NIPC to process something called the business registration certificate. And then the NIPC also has the one-stop shop. So the question is, how is the NIPC harnessing this data So when companies register with the NIPC, does the NIPC have the database where they keep in touch with them? Because the NIPC is also supposed to help with other regulatory challenges that these companies may face from time to time under that umbrella.
Yes, the NIPC, the One-Stop Investment Center is actually, a facilitation mechanism that deals with investors' issues. So most investors, you find out that they use proxies for the registration. So there are few ones that we can reach out to based on the data we have. But then for any company to actually be registered in NIPC, we have all their data. But it's not all companies that register with NIPC that actually come forward to seek for the PSI. So I think we should be doing more by actually sensitizing the public, because majority of them might not know. All they know about is that, look, for us to commence business in Nigeria, we need to be registered with NIPC, not minding that, we can offer some other things like the incentive. So most of the times their priority is just to come over, do the business registration, and take off. So that boils down to the fact that we need to start some form of sensitization for entrepreneurs to know about the incentive.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Mrs. Uchenna. The other thing worthy to mention is the Nigerian Startup Act 2022. It is a co-created act that has elements of various incentives that have then been consummated within the Nigerian Startup Act. And one of the key initiatives is to embed pioneer status incentive within the Nigerian Startup Act to enable startups, specifically labeled startups, to be able to access pioneer status incentive through the secretariat from the Nigerian Startup Act. It just essentially helps that process seamless between the NIPC and the secretariat at the Nigerian Startup Act portal. So I think through that portal, which is a framework that the Nigerian Startup Act has started to use to label and aggregate startups, I think that portal would also help startups that are tech-enabled or that use software in their repository of business modeling to know a bit more about the pioneer status. But the Nigerian Startup Act is mostly for tech-enabled businesses or companies that use the process software development as part of their business models.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Go ahead, madam.
No. I was just informing Lizzie that was well noted for the tech companies. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Lizzie, for the additional insights. And madam, in terms of the sensitization, it also flows on from the initial comments you had where you said, companies that are largely foreign owned are the ones that even come out and ask questions, while maybe companies that are local, although the local companies here, there is a bit to sensitize them further. So that's very key. Thank you so much for the insights shared. We'll move to the second question on the poll. Thank you very much for your responses. Please keep them coming. Do you think that the list of pioneer industries and products reflects economic inclusion and diversification? I'm looking forward to the responses here. Yes, I agree. No additions should be made to the lists. Okay, so we have 75% of our participants stating that, the list should be broadened and, there should be more inclusions for the pioneer industries and products.
Okay.
Lizzie, your thoughts?
Yeah, but,
I'm just trying to draw a parallel between this response and the responses from the initial poll. where some were of the opinion, some of our participants were of the opinion that the pioneer status was not as effective. But now, could it be that some of them are saying it's not as effective, maybe because it needs to include some more sectors and products? Additions should be made to the list. So maybe some are thinking the list should be expanded. Some may be thinking of transparency, equity, because for tax incentives to really serve the purpose of the country, there should be transparency and equity in the process. I think, Mrs. Uche, it would be worthy to mention that there is indeed a process to get the public or stakeholders to contribute in the list, in the updating of the pioneer status list. The president has the prerogative, like we had mentioned, where he's satisfied that an industry needs to be developed to suit the economic requirements of the country. But beyond that, in the IDA, there's also provision for people to submit, stakeholders to submit an application to include products and industry into the pioneer list. And also following the reforms of 2017, the pioneer status list was supposed to be reviewed every 2 years, actually, based on that guideline. And stakeholders were enjoined to submit the list of industries or products that they think could be on that list or should be deleted from the list, and must submit it with rationale, succinct rationale for that purpose. So it's good to note that it's actually an inclusive process of generating the pioneer status list. So maybe Mrs. Uchenna, you can put in your own comments to give more context.
Yes, thanks, Lizzie. It's actually an inclusive process because there's a committee on the PSI review. So even the PSI reform was done by the committee. So for the list too, it's also part of what the committee is meant to be handling. And you need to also note that the review of the current list had already started, but unfortunately we had to step it down a bit because of the current reform that is going on. So it's after the reform that we can continue with that. That is, if it will be necessary anyway. But then talking about inclusion of more activities to the list, like the previous one we did, we actually sent out letters to all the relevant stakeholders, of which KPMG was one of the stakeholders that we sent for inclusion. By the time they send in the list, after deliberations and all that, it still goes to the federal executive. That was how the old list was now reviewed to the current one of 99. So it's actually an elaborate committee and stakeholders engagement. So for now, the biennial needs to be stepped down given the current reform that is ongoing. So hopefully we'll get to know the way forward soon.
Thank you so much.
On that.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Uche.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Uche and Lizzie. We're keeping our fingers crossed in light of your comments. Yeah. So we'll move to the next question on the poll. Thank you so very much to our participants. Please keep the response coming. The next question is, what do you think is the most significant challenge in applying for pioneer status incentive? Is the process complicated? Is the lack of awareness the significant challenge? Is it the eligibility criteria that is a significant challenge, or the bureaucratic process, or lack of trust in the system? Okay. So, okay. So we have the responses swing between complex application process and, interesting.
Yeah.
I think I'll just pause at this point. I'll wait for the feedback.
Okay.
Ms. Uche, the crown has landed on your head.
Honestly.
This
that I cannot, for you to say that the process, is complex, is a kind of trying to look at the entire scheme as a joke. Because for me, if you look at what the federal government is trying to do, they are trying to forgo revenue to these investors. And for us to be able to grant PSI to a company, we need to know the material investment that that company is bringing on board. That's in Nigeria, in terms of the investment you're going to do and what kind of investment, how does it, benefit the country? So if you're saying the process is a complex one, then maybe I'll have to go through the process again for you to look at the real thing and know that it's not complex. It's just that there is this gap between the applicant and whosoever is trying to, you find out that most of the times, these companies don't come directly to us, okay? They do it through proxies like consultants, which is very okay. You'll find out that most of the times when the consultants are sound about it, they are able to guide them, to tell them to get those documentations right. And it's usually not a problem. But for all those companies that want to do it by themselves, by the time they come, and we'll tell them that, look, you need to do a PowerPoint presentation, they will be asking you, a PowerPoint presentation. So how will that one? So they even see PowerPoint presentation as a big deal. So that's part of the complex we're talking about now. Then by the time you tell them that, look, you have to bring all the requisite documentation and regulatory documentation, for us to forgo revenue for an investor, you need to be registered with ITF, PENCOM, NSITF, and you need to also be captured in the tax net. Even if the tax certificate that you're going to present is going to be nil-nil because the product or the activity has not yet started paying tax, we need to see you doing all the regulatory activities before even coming to us that you're applying for the PSI. So you find out that some companies, they see all those things that we request from them as Herculean tax, and that's why they are saying that, oh, it's a bureaucratic process. I tell you, because the simple thing you need to do when you want a PSI is for you to just write a formal letter to NIPC requesting that you want a pioneer status incentive. Once we get that letter, we send you there's a response, and that response comes with, we even give details, a detailed format of how the PowerPoint presentation is meant to be. We give all those information for them to now come and do the PowerPoint. After the PowerPoint presentation, if the committee ascertains that, yes, your activity qualifies and we should go ahead with the process, then the division now sends a letter to the company telling them that they should go to the next stage, which is filling the form and submitting all the requisite documentation. And you find out that when you look at that form, the form is very detailed, but you cannot say it's bureaucratic, because if you're a company that is into production of some sort of product or even activity, filling those information, to that form will not be a problem too. So you fill the form and attach all those requisite documentations, then submit to NIPC. Upon that submission, then you pay the requisite fee, that's the processing fee, and also the verification, that's the due diligence fee. Once you do that payment, then a team of officers from NIPC goes for an inspection, for a due diligence, because what you have presented to NIPC, we need to go and ascertain that what you presented to us is actually what is on ground and that you have commenced business. So once we get that, we come back to NIPC, put up our report, the TC meets on it, the TC considers, and it goes to management. So it's now left for management for them to now do their final consideration and possibly approve it based on the merit of the project. So tell me, what is bureaucratic about this process for a government foregoing its revenue? I don't see it as bureaucratic. I just see it as being as doing the right thing and gathering data. Because if we don't have those kind of forms that people tend to see as difficult in filling, we cannot actually harness all those data that we use for our reports. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Uche, for the deep delve, into the process. Some comments where an understanding is not very clear, right? The process may then look, cumbersome, right? But with clarity and proper understanding, then I think that can be, surmounted. So thank you very much, for the deep delve into explaining the process.
You're welcome.
We would move to the next question. So we'll just quickly take the next question. Do you think that the exemption period for the payment of companies' income tax is adequate? So exemption period being 3 years, as communicated previously, or an additional 1 or 2 years. Okay. Yes, it is. Has the order of the day. Yes, it is. Thank you so much for your responses. So please, we'll just take the last question. Oh, okay, this is changing. About 70%, I think it's interesting. It may be, so about 36% feel it may be adequate for some sectors, while it may not be for others, right? But I think in terms of the general feel from the House, it appears to be adequate. Lizzie, any thoughts on this before we move to the last question?
Yeah, it seems like 60% think it's adequate. It's interesting, 10% say the exemption period should be increased. Well, somebody has changed their mind now. But essentially, right now, we've seen quite a few government interventions in the form of, for instance, emergency bills, the inflation reduction. So companies, especially manufacturing companies and service companies also, they're all going through a period of economic turbulence, and interventions from the government is playing a key role in helping businesses navigate this terrain. So the tax holiday, to some extent, continues to be, some people call it a lifeline, albeit brief. But the good thing is, government cannot forgo revenue for an unduly extended period. There has to be a point where the company has reached some level of, break-even stabilization for the government to then start to recoup the taxes it had forgone while the company scales. So based on the law now, what we have based on the idea is the 3 years and then potential for 1 and then 2 years. And the scheme is undergoing review, especially in the context of what we have happening globally, BEPS, base erosion profit shifting, Pillar 2 with the global minimum tax. So it's very critical that also Nigeria is not ceding its tax rights to foreign jurisdictions. So all that must be looked at in context to determine tax incentives and sunset periods, and then tax expenditure framework, basically ensuring that there's a cost-benefit analysis of these incentives, which ideally should be targeted And that's what the Pioneer State is trying to do, target specific sectors of the economy that would unlock benefits to the prosperity of the country at large. And at the end of the day, it will end up generating tax revenue for public services when you look at it on a medium to long term.
Thank you very much, Lizzie, for the additional insights, quite insightful. I would move to the last question. Okay, does Nigeria project itself as a viable and business-friendly investment destination? Yes, I think so. No, in fact, existing businesses are having to shut down and move their businesses to other countries. I think, Lizzie, you had touched a bit, on the current economic climb, and I think a number of our participants, in fact, a large number of our participants, are skilled in light of the current situation.
Yeah, I mean, Nana, it's no surprise. We've seen quite a few of the manufacturing companies exit Nigeria in the last year, in the last 2 years. There's some that were actually set up, maybe in the last 3 to 4 years, and they're exiting the country. So it is indeed, it's a matter of urgency that the government must continue to put efforts to create that enabling environment for businesses to thrive. And the NIPC is also trying to play their own role. It'll be interesting, Mrs. Uchenna, what do you think about this response? 86% of our participants are saying that existing businesses are having to shut down. I mean, it's no surprise. We've seen quite a few of these multinationals divest. We've seen Diageo recently, Kimberly-Clark, quite a few of them. So
yeah, it's really unfortunate, Lizzie, but you'll find out that business is what it is. As some are shutting down, some are coming in based on our record. But that does not mean that it's not a source of concern to NIPC. In NIPC, we have a department that is into policy advocacy, and they are working assiduously towards, coming up with policies which will be escalated to the federal executive on how we can manage the situation.
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot, Mrs. Uche. It seems like as you were speaking, there might have been 1 or 2 people that changed their mind to say maybe
it got to 80.
because it was 83 before. So maybe now that they understand that there's some level of advocacy. I mean, there's always going to be advocacy at this point. The government, to a large extent, we believe they may be listening. We've seen some intervention, but the question is it really enough? But we're seeing headline inflation reaching almost 34% now. So these are really challenging times, and the Forex regime is also really biting at manufacturing companies and other companies in various sectors. So this is very critical time in an economy, and decisions that are made now concerning policy would really be a turning point for whether companies want to stay or really exit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our participants. It's interesting to see your views, your understanding, coming to bear during the conversation. So thank you so much for participating. We would be moving fully into the question and answer session at this point. So please drop your questions in the chat box, and we would be addressing these questions from now. Thank you. Okay, so I think we have a question, and the question is around the comments made earlier regarding extension, right? Considering the period the understanding this the participant has is considering that the period for extension or the application for an extension is supposed to be made before the expiration, few weeks before the expiration of the initial PSI, and that considering that there is a maximum of 25 weeks before approval, what will be the fate of the business in the aspect of withholding tax deductions? As we are aware, these are transactional and we may continue to occur while the company is seeking extension and then the initial PSI has already expired. So what will be the fate of the business in terms of withholding tax deduction on its invoices while it's waiting for the approval for an extended PSI?
Okay, thank you, Abu. You know, what happens is that most companies that apply for extension, so what they do is that they start actually early. You know, you can actually put in your application maybe a month or two before the expiration for you to do the PowerPoint presentation and all the required documentation. So the only thing is that you're supposed to make sure that you apply within that, not later than 1 month after expiration, so you can actually start earlier. And then for companies that are looking at the time frame for approval, like I said initially, if you have everything on ground, not necessarily those number of weeks, it can come much earlier. But then aside from that, for companies that have the issue of withholding taxes, I know of companies that have written us, okay, because they have dealings with some companies that are informing them that they are actually on Pioneer, so the deduction of PS, others withholding tax should not happen to their payment. When they write to us, we confirm to them that their extension is actually in progress and they should please go ahead and not deduct. So we have lots of companies like that. You know, maybe like I said initially, we just need to have more of this sensitization for companies to understand how to go about it. Because for some companies, you find out that the withholding tax is actually a big deal to them. So there's no way they will let that go if they know that they can actually inform, it could be their tenant or business partner, to write to NIPC to ascertain that they are actually processing the PSI. But then extension is actually something that comes faster than the initial 3 years. So it's dependent on how fast and how well you're able to get your documentation, especially the certificate of qualifying capital expenditure. That's what majority of our applicants inform us that it takes forever. It got to a stage when we started even working with letter indicating that they have written to FIRS requesting for that certificate. We've worked on such applications based on the fact that we have ascertained that they've started the process, and the process was within the stipulated time frame as stated in the EDITRA. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mrs. Uche. You know, from the comments that you made, there was actually a question that you touched on, right? Which was the certificate of qualifying capital expenditure. Very interesting to note that you understand that sometimes there may be some, delays, right, processing that certificate, but it doesn't mar you as the NIPC, from continuing with the process. And that's really one that is, commendable, right? And I think the question that the participant had with respect to the qualifying capital expenditure.
Just a minute, right? We continue with the process and ensure that before approval is given, just giving them that time of not being able to submit as at when the process starts. But before approval is granted, which might take up to 4 weeks to 8 weeks, they should be able to get that done and submit before we take it to management for approval.
Okay, thanks for that clarification, which also kind of touches, on the question from the participant, and maybe Lizzie, you may share some experience in this regard as to how long it typically takes to process the certificate of qualifying capital expenditure from the FIRS.
So yeah, so that depends really on a few factors. I mentioned before that the certificate of fixed asset acceptance is a precursor to getting your certificate of qualifying capital expenditure. So once you have your CAFA, you are really basically extremely shortened the process of your application, because to a large extent there is cooperation between the FIRS in terms of relying on some of the data they've received from the CAFA. So that period of getting your certificate of qualifying capital expenditure could actually be between 2 weeks from when you submit your application. And that is obviously on the premise that you have your certificate of qualifying capital expenditure document, or if you don't have it, your assets, the invoices for your assets have really been collated and they correspond to what you have in your financial statements. So once you have the key documents, which is financial statements and evidence of payment of those assets, it really is not a long process, and it could take between 1 to 2 weeks.
All
The
right.
FIRS is also supposed to conduct an inspection.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lizzie and Mrs. Uche. There is also another question that says that companies that have obtained the PSI, are they also exempted from paying VAT, that is value-added taxes?
No,
Not at
yes.
no.
So as I mentioned previously, it's really on companies' income tax. So they will continue to discharge their obligations of charging VAT. And then also, if they are charged VAT, they are expected to pay the VAT to the vendor, depending on the sector that they're in.
Okay, thank you so much. Madam, I saw that, I'm sure your comments are similar. I heard Madam was about to speak as well, when the question was raised.
Oh, oh.
Mrs. Uche was about to say, for the avoidance of doubt.
Yeah. Not at all. You
We
have
need to start that
pay
actually. We're completely aligned. So I'm sure that the participant is informed, right? So thank you so much for, the context being provided. We have this one, but I think this one has been, already discussed, but please just, elaborate, more for clarity. Are PSI benefits obtained by default or on application? So the PSI, are they obtained by default or on application? So, Madam, okay.
Mrs.
Sorry.
Uchenna,
Yes.
do you want to proceed as head of policy?
Yes.
So you give the policy out.
Well, the question is that if they can actually get the PSI. I didn't get the question, please. Sorry.
If they can get the PSI by default.
By default.
Upon application.
No. You have to follow the process. When you say by default, in terms of, you have to be specific.
Okay, so the question, I'll go with the question and then provide a bit of clarity. The question says that are PSI benefits obtained by default or upon application? There's already a list of eligible industries and products. So Lizzie had mentioned during the course of the conversation, manufacturing companies, tourism, real estate, agricultural activities and the likes. So if you're carrying out these activities, by default, do you just get it? Or, so just, like I said, this question has been, trying to elaborate, but just to elaborate a bit more for clarity.
No, you cannot by default. You just have to follow the process as stipulated in the PSI guideline, which you can actually get on our website. There's a NIPC website. So you have to follow the detailed process for you to be able to be granted the PSI. You can't get it on default, not at all.
Lizzie, you're muted.
Okay, Mrs. Uchenna, I do hear you that on default you can't just get it without an application. But if we look at another scenario where a company has applied to the NIPC, and that's also maybe going to also help with responding to one of the questions. If you have a scenario where a company has applied to the NIPC and the framework has said the time frame within which the response should come, and the company has not received a response from the NIPC. I'm aware of an executive order that has mandated that regulatory agencies grant a default approval if that time frame has lapsed and the regulatory authority has not specifically responded to the applicant company that has fulfilled all its regulatory requirements. So if that scenario presents itself, is it something that you think will be able to be tenable, given that the executive order was signed by the president at the time?
Yes, that is if the NIPC did not do what they are meant to have done as at when they are meant to do it. You know, it boils down to what we're working currently at the NIPC, because we are aware of the executive order 1, right? And you'll find out that most companies can just apply for PSI, drop the application, and we don't get to see them for months. We don't get to see them. And by the time you look at their letterhead, you want to respond. You know, in this day and age, some letterheads don't even have emails, on their letterhead, and even phone number. Then for some, it will be this infodex at whatever the name of the company is. And by the time we send our response on receiving the application, most of those companies don't even assess their infodex, because we've had issues like that. So NIPC can maybe look at that, if actually we're at default. But then I have never seen at any point in time where the NIPC is at default. You'll find out that most of the times, in short, all the times, it's the applicant. And what we have started working on is a situation whereby we will not classify an application as a live application until all the requisite documentations are submitted. Just the way the visa application is done, you have to get the entire thing. And it has to come up because of the executive order 1, so that we can also safeguard ourselves. There were instances where some people came up to say, oh, they made an application for over 3 months and no response and everything. By the time we go through our records and everything, we'll find out that, we responded to the email and it's infodex. They were like, no, that email is not functional. So how do we know the functional email? So you find out that at NIPC, it's not as if I'm trying to blow our trumpet, but honestly, we take our work seriously, that I can see a situation that will lead to an applicant getting the PSI at default. So it's not possible, because as we're getting your application, we're already responding to it. Then it's now left for you to also follow suit with your own response and all that. So it's something that is actually, it's cast in stone in terms of what the steps as stated in our process guideline.
Great, thanks. Very explicit, Mrs. Uche. I think the moral of the story indeed is that pioneer status applicant companies must ensure that they're also reachable via valid emails, and ensure that their applications are not left stranded at the NIPC. But that being said, it's obvious that the NIPC is also very cognizant of Executive Order 1, and would obviously try to avoid a situation where by default, upon application by a pioneer status, the company is just granted because the NIPC hasn't completed or fulfilled its own part of the process. So it's clear that every party, both the consultants, the company, and the NIPC, all have to fulfill their role within the expected timelines.
Sure.
Thank you for those prolific responses. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lizzie, for that additional question, and Mrs. Uche for the detailed explanation to provide clarity and context. Thank you so much. I would quickly ask the next question, which is, please clarify, are pioneer companies supposed to deduct withholding taxes from their vendors?
Yes, so as we had mentioned before, the pioneer status does not exempt you from other obligations. So you are still an agent of the government, and you're expected to continue to deduct withholding tax on applicable transactions. You're also supposed to continue your role as an agent of the government for the purpose of deducting pay. So your obligation to deduct withholding tax continues even during the tax holiday period on applicable transactions.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Lizzie, for your response, and Mrs. Uche for affirming. I think there's also a question regarding the costs. So the costs associated with processing the pioneer status incentive. The person just wants to get a bit more clarity on the various costs and fees associated with the PSI.
Okay, so there are relevant fees, like the processing fee for new, like I mentioned initially, is 200,000. Then for extension is 100,000. Then there's what we call the due diligence fee, which is 500,000. Then upon approval, there's what we call the service charge deposit. So the service charge deposit is actually 2.5 million. But then just note that the only deposit to NIPC is just the 2 million, because the 500,000 is now sent or transferred to the IID, that's the industrial, that's inspectorate department, right? That does the effective date for the pioneer. So based on that, it's just 2 million that comes to NIPC as service charge deposit and not the 2.5, even though they pay the 2.5 million in lump sum to NIPC. Then aside from that, when you're now enjoying the PSI, annually you're meant to pay 1% pioneer profit.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Uche, for the clarification on the various fees and the context, provided with respect to the IID, the fees that are also attributable to the IID with respect of the PSI. Thank you so much. There is also a question that has been asked, and maybe Lizzie can provide the context to this one. Kindly give relevant section of the law that exempts pioneer companies from deduction of withholding taxes from their money. So where the pioneer company is a vendor in this instance, right? What section, gives them that exemption from withholding taxes?
Okay, so if you look at the construct of withholding tax, it is primarily an advance payment of income tax. So a company that is exempted from income tax via the IDA will be exempted from withholding tax. And the Section 16 of the Industrial Development Income Tax Relief Act does provide the guidance and provision that you as a pioneer company would not be deemed to have an assessable profit or total profit, and that your profits from your pioneer business is exempt from income tax. And the principal legislation under the Industrial Development Act is the company's income tax. So to the extent that you are exempt from income tax, you're also exempt from withholding tax by virtue of Section 16 of the IDA. Yeah. Also, various FIRS circulars have also alluded to that as well, but the principal legislation is Section 16 of the IDA.
Thank you very much, Lizzie, for the succinct response. I believe that question has been, attended to. There is a follow-on question to Mrs. Uche. While she was speaking, she made reference in terms of the fees. You made a reference to 1% profit of the PSI, and one of our participants would like you to share a bit more insight on the 1% profits that companies that have attained the PSI are required to pay?
Okay, so the 1% pioneer profit is actually gotten from the annual returns that the company sends to us. That's their financials. So, you know, profit before tax is where we apply the 1% to.
Thank you very much, Madam. I believe that question has been attended to. It's a requirement from the NIPC, just like you mentioned, one of those charges, and it's 1% of the profit before taxes. Thank you very much. There is a question that has been addressed, or maybe for clarity, right? You can just touch on it again, please. The participant says, please clarify if the loss incurred by the pioneer company before the pioneer status was granted will be carried into the post-pioneer period. This has been addressed, but maybe the participants missed out on this comment. So please just provide, you know, your comments on the losses attained in pioneer. I think Lizzie addressed this previously. Losses attained during pioneer. What happens post-pioneer if they can be carried forward?
Yes, it can be carried forward.
Okay. So thank you very much. Just to provide a bit more comments, the question was addressed previously, right? And there were also comments around tax assets as well when we addressed the question around the losses. So losses, as Madam has mentioned, can be carried forward post-pioneer. Assets that were also purchased during the period to the extent, right, that those certificates of qualifying capital expenditure were obtained or have been obtained from the FIRS, right? Those assets are frozen and then capital allowance claimed once the company comes out of pioneer. Please keep your questions coming. We are almost at the tail end of the session, but please keep your questions coming. Lizzie, just to maybe while we're waiting for additional comments, right? Just speaking around the comments on additions and deletions, right? Just to get your comments, and then Madam would also share her perspective, right? When additions and deletions are made to the list of pioneer status industrial products, when does this typically take effect? And how does this process work when there are additions and deletions to the lists?
Right? It's immediately after the approval.
Okay. Hello?
I can hear you, Lizzie.
Okay, so yes, so for additions, following the reforms in 2017, there was a clear guideline on the process for additions to the pioneer list, and the pioneer list will include those additions immediately after the FEC, the Federal Executive Council, has approved those industries or products to be added to the pioneer list. And with deletions, it will take effect from 3 years following the approval of that deletion. So we saw that happen with cement, where the review was done in August of 2017, and there was a proposal for cement to be delisted from the pioneer list within a 3-year period. And that's effectively to give a transition period. And we expect that same protocol to be observed with subsequent additions or deletions. So in summary, additions are effective immediately, and deletions take a 3-year period.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. I think very clear in terms of the additions. And then for the deletions, right, that's sunset period, just like you mentioned, it is envisaged that if there were to be deletions from the list, that same protocol will still, replicate itself going forward. It would help companies be able to gain, have that phase for them to be able to get out of the benefits that they've been enjoying, rather than it being, abrupt, right? And then it also gives investors, if you look at it again, it gives some sort of confidence to investors where you're not just thinking that, oh, there's this eligible industrial product, and then tomorrow, right, a law comes and then that's industry is yanked off the list. And then what happens to me? I just got my PSI 2-3 months ago, right? So it gives that transition phase really gives some level of, confidence to investors. So please, for our participants that are eligible, right? Madam has also mentioned in the course of the conversation when we're talking about the responses around complexity and bureaucratic process, having, to engage consultants that really understand the process and can guide you, appropriately would go a long way in, demystifying, any myth around the whole application process. So thank you so much, Madam, Mrs. Uche. Thank you so much, Lizzie, for all the insights that you have, brought to bear today. Obviously your years of experience, have come through, and we've gotten comments even from our participants thanking us, for a very insightful sessions. The fact that the conversations are robust and we've been professional in delving into the topic today to, provide context and understanding. Thank you so very much. Lizzie, comments and any additional comments, and then we'll take comments from Madam as well in light of the session so far.
Yes, thank you, Nana, for a great show, moderating. I must say thank you to our participants for spending this time with us, this 2 hours. It has indeed been an insightful session. I must also say thank you to Mrs. Uchenna for gracing us with her presence and accepting this invite. The Pioneer Status Incentive has been a topic of great debate in the context of budgetary deficits, in the context of companies looking for support and a lifeline, as it were, in navigating economic turbulence. But we are seeing that a lot of companies have also really benefited from the Pioneer Status Incentive. As a matter of fact, the FIRS published and gave awards to companies for the top 20 taxpayers, and a significant amount of companies on that list had benefited from the Pioneer Status Incentive, showing or providing a premise to understand that the tax incentive gives companies the opportunity to really scale their operations, which then subsequently can result in significant taxes for the government to receive in the future. So Pioneer Status will definitely come under review. Other tax incentives also will come under review for reforms in the context of global tax rules and protecting our tax jurisdiction. But in the context of that, it's important that taxpayers are also in the center of the reforms to ensure that there's equity and to ensure that the Nigerian business environment continues to attract both local and foreign investors. So I do thank you all for your time, and we look forward to seeing you at our next tax chat, and we look forward to engaging with you further on various tax topics. Over to you, Mrs. Uchenna.
Thank you, Lizzie and Nana. And to the participants, all I can say is that there are lots of benefits, of that's the PSI to the nation and also to the companies. And you find out that most companies in their early stage, it's usually not very easy. So the PSI seeks to enhance their survival, profitability, sustainability, to them. So all I can say to most of the entrepreneurs that are present and the ones that are not even present on this platform, that they should actually come forward for any of their products that are pioneer products, for them to get it, because the current economy is actually not that favorable to businesses. So they should actually come forward, process it, so that we can actually have their businesses thriving in Nigeria. Because aside from the PSI, we also know that Nigeria, we have great market. We have a great return on investment. Don't be scared about companies leaving. Like I told you, businesses will come and go, but then the nation will always be here for us, and the government is working assiduously in making sure that policies are aligned in making businesses thrive. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Mrs. Uche. Thank you very much, Lizzie. Thank you for the motivating words, right? You heard it all, our dear participants. We thank you so much for joining us today. You've heard from Madam. Please send in your applications as far as you're eligible. I trust that this session has been enlightening, impactful, and insightful. We look forward to seeing you again at the next edition of our social media tax chats. Thank you so very much, and do have a very good day. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
This isn't the world you grew up in. You've become an expert in areas of the business that go well beyond tax. Your organization is more global, increasingly digital. Your business models are more complex. Compliance is getting complicated, and penalties are more severe. Governments around the world have moved towards taxes that are easier to collect and administer through technology. Suddenly, your board wants to hear from you about risks and opportunities, and you're not the tax leader you were when you started out. You know how to transform your tax data into meaningful insights. And if you're anything like the other ambitious, future-thinking tax leaders out there, you've managed to do all of this with fewer resources and less budget. Maybe these tools still feel disconnected from one another. Not anymore. Introducing KPMG Digital Gateway, the single platform solution that gives you access to the full suite of KPMG tax and legal technologies you use. Across our global network, we are investing $5 billion over 5 years in technology, people, and innovation to accelerate the digital transformation of KPMG firms and our clients, and more than $1 billion in tax and legal technology specifically in that period. KPMG Digital Gateway puts the fruit of our investments at your fingertips, bringing together the expertise of alliances, technology solutions, and the KPMG global network of professionals into one integrated platform. Putting our investments in machine learning, deep analytics, visualizations, and AI technologies in one place, all driven by the rich data you already have on hand, powered by Microsoft Azure, built on the cloud. KPMG Digital Gateway and the teams behind the solutions are working together to help change the lives of tax leaders and their teams, redefining target operating models and transforming tax functions for the new world order. You've done so much already. Just imagine what the future of tax will be with a platform like this behind you.